You don't come for Deion Sanders' son and expect to walk away clean, especially when your own resume can't even stand the heat. When Gabriel opened his mouth and took an unprovoked shot at Deion Sanders, it wasn't just a bad take, it was a full-blown miscalculation, a rookie mistake. And then, Stephen A. Smith stepped in. Now, Stephen A. doesn't waste time on nobodies. But this time? Oh. He brought the fire with facts. Because Gabriel didn't just target a quarterback. He went for the son of one of the most scrutinized, charismatic, and unapologetic figures in modern sports, Deion Coach Prime Sanders. And what Stephen A. said next? It didn't just shut Gabriel down, it exposed a much bigger issue. One that reaches beyond stats, beyond preseason analysis, into a system that's been trying to shape, silence, and sideline a new generation of athletes who refuse to play by the old-school rulebook. This wasn't just football beef. It was personal. It was political. It was prime time. And once you hear how far it actually went, how deep the sabotage might run, you'll realize this wasn't just a war of words. It might have been a coordinated effort to derail an NFL future before it even started. So what did Deion Gabriel really say? Why did Stephen A. Smith respond so directly? And what's happening behind closed doors that no one wants to admit? Let's break it all down. It should have been just another post-game moment, a new quarterback making his media debut, reflecting on his first preseason appearance. But instead of keeping it humble, Deion Gabriel made a choice, one that lit a match in a room full of gas. He took a public swipe at Deion Sanders. Now, on the surface, it might have seemed like confidence, just one quarterback talking about another, but the energy behind it? It didn't sit right. Gabriel didn't just compare stats. He questioned standing. He questioned status. As if Shedeur hadn't earned the spotlight. As if his rise was more hype than substance. Bad move. Because when a player who hasn't proven himself at the highest level takes a swing at someone carrying the weight of a national brand, the reactions come fast and fierce. And that's exactly what happened when Stephen A. Smith heard what Gabriel said. Stephen A. went in without hesitation. And unlike a lot of pundits, he didn't cloud it with vague sports talk or weak language. He called Gabriel's comments what they were: stupid, idiotic, and immature. He clapped back in real time, on air, with the kind of clarity that makes headlines and highlights. To quote Stephen A. directly, "It was a dumb comment to make. First of all, let me tell you something right now, in every walk of life, far beyond the football field, those who produce get treated differently than those who don't." That wasn't just commentary, that was judgment, and it landed hard. Stephen A.'s point wasn't just that Shedeur outperformed Gabriel, it was that Gabriel had no business speaking on that level in the first place. One quarterback had stepped into the media spotlight without an ounce of hesitation, and instead of rising with humility, he threw shade. But the problem wasn't only what Gabriel said, it was when he said it. Because let's be real, in this current sports landscape, Deion Sanders isn't just another college quarterback. He's the topic, the storyline, the headline. And it's not just because of his last name, it's because of what he's done. High-level production under high-level pressure, while representing a team that's undergone a total identity shift thanks to his leadership. So Gabriel aiming upward like that? It didn't feel like competitive spirit. It felt like insecurity wearing a jersey, and Stephen A. caught it immediately. He recognized the play and not the one happening on the field. He saw the attempt to disrupt the narrative, to chip away at a star who's earned the spotlight piece by piece, against scrutiny most quarterbacks never face. That's why Stephen A. didn't just defend Shedeur, he undressed Deion Gabriel's logic publicly, methodically, and without raising his voice. Because here's the truth. Gabriel isn't known for lighting up against big-time programs. He racks up solid numbers, sure, but mostly against average defenses, in games with little national impact. He's transferred schools, never been a Heisman finalist, and hasn't had that one defining, postseason-defining moment. Meanwhile, Shedeur has done nothing but show control, intelligence, and resilience under the brightest lights, with cameras rolling and eyes fixed on everything he says, does, and wears. So what was Gabriel thinking? That he could take the cultural face of modern college football and reduce him to just another competitor? That his own underdog story gave him enough credibility to swing upward? Maybe. But what he didn't expect was Stephen A. Smith treating him like a headline, not a hero. And as we're about to see, this wasn't about trash talk gone wrong. This was deeper. Because once the criticism started flying, and once people began dissecting who was being protected and who wasn't, it became clear. Gabriel didn't just pick the wrong quarterback, he picked the wrong family. Stephen A. Smith has built his career on calling it like it is. He doesn't pull punches, but he also doesn't speak without substance. So when Deion Gabriel made that offhand criticism of Shedeur Sanders, this wasn't just a social media moment, this was personal to someone who knows the weight of public perception, and who's watched athletes get torn down for being confident, black, and unapologetically themselves. So how did Stephen A. respond? By going point for point and exposing every layer of Gabriel's false narrative. He started by making Gabriel's resume very clear. Solid stats. Sure, but let's not pretend. He's been a dominant force. Smith pointed out that Gabriel looks great against teams like Tulsa or weaker non-conference opponents, but when the stage elevates, when the lights hit, they don't call his name. He's not the QB that networks promo during primetime games. He's not the one who shifts betting lines or drives social media traffic every Saturday, but Shedeur Sanders is. And that's exactly why this became bigger than a preseason comparison. According to Stephen A., Gabriel didn't just make a questionable comment, he made one from a place he hadn't earned yet. In a league where perception can be louder than production, Gabriel tried to reposition himself by downplaying someone who's done more under harder conditions. Shedeur wasn't handed anything. He took over a struggling Colorado program, came in under the spotlight of being Deion's son, and still delivered under pressure. It wasn't just a fence that Shedeur ran, it was narrative control, and that's a dangerous thing to overlook. Stephen A. laid it out clearly. Dan Orlovsky might sit up here and say, "I thought Deion Gabriel played better." That's just analysis. This wasn't analysis, this was arrogance. Gabriel's comments weren't just about performance. It came off like he was trying to delegitimize the hype, to undercut the traction Shedeur's built not through press conferences, but through playmaking, leadership, and cultural relevance. That's why Smith pushed back so hard. This wasn't protecting hype, this was defending earned respect. And in this moment, Stephen A. wasn't making it about race, but he didn't need to. Commentators, fans, and fellow players could hear the subtext clearly. Because let's be honest, when a rising black quarterback shows swagger, confidence, and speaks with clarity, the microscope doesn't zoom out, it zooms in. Every facial expression, every quote, every celebration becomes a question of attitude or humility. Meanwhile, players like Gabriel, more reserved, less visible to the masses, can throw out critiques, and it gets dressed down as competitive spirit. But not this time. Stephen A. caught what was really going on. Gabriel walked into a media moment and swung way out of his weight class. Instead of talking about his own development or owning his mistakes, he put a target on a player who had nothing to do with his performance that day. A player who, by every possible angle pressure, coaching, opposition, has faced more, criticized less, and overcome more consistently. And Smith didn't just defend Shedeur, he shifted the lens. He reminded everyone that this isn't about feelings or platforms. It's about performance, period. So when Gabriel stepped up to the mic, Stephen A. didn't just check his words, he checked his credentials. Because here's the truth, respected voices in sports media don't take sides for clout. They take stands when someone tries to game the system. And when the system already leans suspiciously against players like Shedeur, that kind of critique, especially from someone like Gabriel, needs to be challenged. And Stephen A. did just that. But this wasn't even the biggest twist. Because while most people saw Gabriel's comments as just football talk, another layer was already unfolding behind the scenes, one that suggested the criticism of Shedeur Sanders wasn't just random, it was strategic. And what happened next? It might be the most disrespectful move the NFL has seen in years. In sports, talk is cheap. And if you're going to talk loud, you better have a resume that backs it all up. But when you take a closer look at Deion Gabriel's record, the problem becomes crystal clear he had no business criticizing anyone, let alone someone like Shedeur Sanders. Gabriel is, by all accounts, a solid quarterback, accurate, composed, and efficient. But solid doesn't shake up the landscape. It doesn't rewrite storylines. And it definitely doesn't warrant you throwing public jabs at a player who's already proven they can carry the weight of a crumbling football program on their back. Gabriel has consistently put up respectable numbers against teams like Tulsa, Arkansas State, and other non-championship caliber programs. But once the competition steps up, so does the pressure. And that's when his numbers start to flatten. There are no iconic bowl game moments, no comeback drives under playoff lights, no epic throw that etched his name into college football history. He's moved between programs from UCF to Oklahoma to the NFL, but with each stop, he remained a familiar story. Decent numbers, flashes of potential, and then fade into the middle of the pack. That's not a knock on his work, but it is the context people like Stephen A. say you must have before stepping up and criticizing someone who's done a whole lot more with a whole lot less. Compare that to Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur didn't inherit a powerhouse program. He was dropped into Colorado, a school that hadn't made headlines for football since most fans were in middle school. But under the crushing weight of media attention, the burden of being Coach Prime's son, and a depth chart full of transfers, he delivered. Week after week, Shedeur showed command of the offense, made tight red throws under pressure, and maintained a poise that looked NFL-ready without crumbling under the one thing most quarterbacks buckle from: constant national scrutiny. And let's not pretend that scrutiny is equal. For Deion Gabriel, a bad game is chalked up to a rough outing. For Shedeur Sanders, a single interception can spark trending think pieces about attitude, culture, and whether he really has it. The standards are different, and they always have been. That's why Gabriel's comment hit a nerve, because it wasn't just weak, it was willfully tone-deaf to the reality. Shedeur lives in every single game. This wasn't athlete versus athlete anymore. This was someone who has never carried a brand, never filled arenas simply by showing up, and never faced criticism, layered in coded language, trying to shrink a player who has done all three. And that's why Stephen A. wasn't just critiquing Gabriel's words, he was defending the entire premise of merit, the idea that you prove who you are on the field before you run your mouth behind the mic. Because if you haven't been under the lights, like Shedeur, if you haven't been targeted by critics, doubted by executives, and still showed up ready to throw, then you don't get to question someone who has. Especially when your biggest sports headlines are about which school you're transferring to next, not what you've done under pressure. Gabriel's criticism wasn't just off, it was coming from a place he hadn't earned. And that's the worst kind of noise you can make in a world where talent, timing, and media narratives collide hard and fast. But what if Gabriel wasn't the real issue? Because right after his comments, something much bigger started surfacing: whispers about a plan, about coordinated silence, and about moves happening at the league level that could derail Shedeur Sanders before the next NFL draft even arrives. What started as a preseason story about one quarterback criticizing another quickly turned into something much deeper, something darker. Because suddenly, the criticism surrounding Shedeur Sanders wasn't just coming from guys like Deion Gabriel, it started coming from everywhere. NFL analysts grew quiet. Mock drafts, which once had Shedeur floating in the top 5, began quietly sliding him down. Now 7th, now 10th. Then some listed him outside the first round entirely. The numbers never changed. His performance stayed sharp. His leadership remained constant. So what happened? That's when former NFL safety-turned-analyst Ryan Clark broke the silence, and what he said almost no one was ready to admit out loud. This wasn't a natural draft slide. This was an analyst's cooling off after new talent emerged. According to Ryan Clark, it was something else. They're not overlooking Shedeur Sanders, he said. They're suppressing him. He called it political, he called it deliberate, and suddenly, everything started to make sense. Because Shedeur's fall in draft rankings didn't match his tape, it didn't match the stats, and it definitely didn't match the way NFL teams normally handle future franchise cornerstones. Clark didn't hold back. He even went a step further, linking the suppression of Shedeur to a much bigger name: Deion Sanders. The same Coach Prime who revitalized Jackson State from irrelevance. The same man who put Colorado football back on the map. The same leader who dances with his players, rocks his chains unapologetically, and refuses to speak in coach speak just to keep the establishment comfortable. And now he's the problem? The NFL establishment may not say it out loud, but behind closed doors, there seems to be real discomfort with the kind of culture Deion and Shedeur represent. Not arrogance. Independence, pride, visibility without permission. And the league has never liked players or families that don't play the game their way. Because let's be honest, if Shedeur Sanders had posted the same exact stats, the same poise, the same control, but done it at Alabama or Ohio State instead of under his father's spotlight, we already know what the headlines would say. He'd be the face of the draft. There'd be a 6-part ESPN docuseries. Nike deals. National press. first pick buds, but instead, there's silence. Artificial silence. And now, fans are asking questions. The narrative didn't just shift on its own, it was crafted. Engineered by people uncomfortable with how loud, confident, and effective Deion and Shedeur Sanders have become on their own terms. It's not just about the way Shedeur plays. It's about who he is, what he represents, and what it means if he succeeds. Because if he makes it to the NFL and becomes a star without ever bowing down, without ever toning it down, without ever asking for anyone's approval, that breaks the entire formula. So while Dillon Gabriel's jab was just a spark, what Ryan Clark revealed pulled the curtain all the way back. This isn't just a battle for a spot on the draft board. This is about who's even allowed to climb it. But Deion Sanders didn't build a platform for his son just to watch him fall quietly through the cracks. And he certainly didn't train Shedeur to shrink for scouts. And what's coming next? That might just be the part that shakes the NFL to its core. To the public, he's Coach Prime. He wears designer sunglasses indoors, flashes his gold chains on the sidelines, drops lines sharper than half the NFL's PR teams. He's charisma in cleats, swagger in a headset. But behind the flash, behind the headlines, and mic drop moments, Deion Sanders is first and foremost a father. And when he looks at what's happening to Shedeur, you can see the pain behind the smile. Because this battle suddenly isn't about recruiting, or game strategy, or even media narratives. It's about watching his own son, a quarterback with elite poise, NFL-level metrics, and real franchise potential, get deliberately pushed out of the spotlight that he's already earned. And that hits differently. In a recent conversation, Deion opened up about his own physical battles. Multiple surgeries, blood clots, an amputation, the toll of the game, of leadership, of years spent fighting battles most people never see. Still, he talks about it with strength. But the heaviest weight he carries? Watching the football world try to drag down his son and not being able to call it what it really is. Because what's happening to Shedeur, it's not performance-based. It's not fair competition. It's not just the business. It's personnel. Mock drafts quietly shifting. Analysts suddenly vague. Once there was buzz, now there's doubt. And through it all, Shedeur hasn't changed. His play still speaks for itself. But the narrative? That's being rewritten by people who won't say why. As a father, as a coach, and as a black man who's broken through nearly every gate the system's thrown at him, Deion has seen this pattern before. Elevate, celebrate, then punish. It's no coincidence that once Shedeur started to look like a #1 overall pick, the whispers started getting louder. Words like attitude, brand risk, and fit began replacing actual football talk. What they won't say out loud, they let leak in coded language. That's why when Ryan Clark dropped his bombshell saying that powerful NFL voices were actively suppressing Shedeur's profile, it hit with impact, because Deion has been here before. As a player, they tried to silence him with criticism about the way he celebrated touchdowns. As a coach, they said he was a marketing gimmick, a distraction, too loud, too flashy. But now, it's his son paying the price for the same unapologetic excellence. And that changes everything. Deion isn't just protecting a quarterback, he's protecting his legacy. The Sanders name doesn't just stand for stardom, it stands for doing things outside the mold, and that's what terrifies the people behind the scenes. That's why this draft situation doesn't just sting, it exposes a system that rewards comfort over courage. And still, Deion hasn't launched a media war. He hasn't lashed out at the NFL or demanded Shedeur be ranked higher. He's just kept coaching, kept building, kept mentoring kids in the transfer portal, on the recruiting trail, in locker rooms full of young men watching this unfold. Because that's the other layer. It's not just about Shedeur or Gabriel anymore. It's about the message being sent to every rising black athlete with a voice. If you speak too clearly, stand too tall, carry your family name with too much pride, the system might come for you too. And that's why this battle is far from over. Because for Deion Sanders, this isn't just about one kid's draft stock. This is about setting a precedent for his son, and for every athlete coming up behind him. By now, it's crystal clear. This battle was never just about football. Because when you really break it down, Shedeur Sanders isn't just a quarterback, he's a walking contradiction to everything the traditional system expects and accepts. He's confident, but not careless. Talented, but not reliant on hype. And most of all, he's visible, loud, and unapologetically himself. That's the threat. Not his stat line, not his throwing motion, not his completion percentage. The threat is that he doesn't ask for approval. He walks like someone who knows exactly who he is and doesn't beg the media, the NFL, or even the fans to co-sign his journey. And in a league that thrives on select narratives and press-coached humility, that kind of raw self-belief makes executives nervous. It's the same thing we've seen over and over again. When a player comes from the factory Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State media outlets build them up with tailored highlights, cookie-cutter interviews, and perfectly timed story arcs. But when a player comes with a voice, a father who built a media empire, and a background that doesn't fit the league's polished image, the road gets harder real fast. Shedeur Sanders doesn't just throw touchdowns, he moves conversation. He tweets, he posts, and most of all, he carries himself like a brand that doesn't need outside validation. And for some in power, that's not marketable. That's unmanageable. Which brings everything back to the word Ryan Clark used so deliberately: political. Shedeur's draft slide doesn't make sense from a football perspective. But it does make sense if you understand how much of football, especially NFL football, is about image, control, and comfort level inside boardrooms full of old-school expectations. It makes sense when you realize that the system is more comfortable with controlled greatness than independent excellence. Because let's be honest, if Shedeur had the same stats at Alabama, there would be no concerns. He'd be the face of Gatorade by now. ESPN would be following his every move. Executives would be calling him the next Mahomes because of his poise, not questioning his impact behind closed doors. But that's not what's happening. Instead, there's radio silence, cold shoulders, subtle hits about his fit and media footprint, all buzzwords that mean one thing: Shedeur is too confident, too loud, and too different for a system that still prefers its stars scripted. It's the same reason Deion Sanders was criticized for speaking openly about NIL chaos, even though Nick Saban, Lane Kiffin, and others have said the same thing. It's not what's being said, it's who's saying it, and whether the speaker is playing by rules they never agreed to. That form of subtle pushback, whether it's aimed at Deion or Shedeur, isn't about success. It's about maintaining control of the narrative. Because if Shedeur succeeds fully, publicly, and loudly, that becomes a new blueprint. And suddenly, the next five-star quarterback doesn't think he has to hide his confidence, doesn't think he has to downplay his pride, doesn't think he needs to smile and nod just to get a fair shot. That ripple effect terrifies the system that's been writing the same story for decades. Humble beginnings, coachable attitude, team, first personality. Box checked, character confirmed. But Shedeur's writing his own story. No ghost writers. And when you do that, when you are that, you don't just change your draft stock. You threaten to change the entire game. Let's get something straight. Deion Sanders isn't afraid of smoke. He's been in the spotlight since the day he stepped on a football field, and he's delivered at every level as a player, as a commentator, as a head coach. But when Coach Prime speaks with clarity and confidence, the reaction tells you everything you need to know about who gets to lead and what leadership is acceptable. Because if a white coach like Nick Saban questions the chaos surrounding NIL money, he's praised for foresight. If Lane Kiffin complains about the transfer portal wrecking recruiting, he's called transparent and real. But when Deion Sanders says the exact same thing, he's a hypocrite. Opportunistic. Jealous the advantage is gone. Really? Where was this energy when coaches with less impact and fewer receipts vented about the same issues? Where were the headlines accusing Jimbo Fisher of double standards after he called NIL out of control? There weren't any. Because when Deion speaks, he isn't just challenging policy, he's challenging power. Let's go back. At Jackson State, Deion smashed expectations. He raised the school's profile, brought in elite recruits, captured national attention, and most importantly, shifted culture. Companies started calling that hadn't cared about HBCUs in decades. Draft picks came out of nowhere. Media presence exploded. He used the NIL structure to empower athletes who had been ignored not for clout, but for correction. And still, the moment he speaks truth about needing guardrails, suddenly he's on trial. That's the double standard. When white coaches want order, it's seen as insight. When Deion wants it, he's trying to change the game to favor his sons. And that accusation? It's deeper than football. Because lurking inside every criticism is a question people are too nervous to say out loud. Can we trust a black man this confident who doesn't ask permission to lead at the highest level? That's the real threat. Coach Prime doesn't just lead with results, he leads with force, with flavor, and with honesty. He doesn't water things down for the camera, and he doesn't shrink himself to fit in with the good old boys running the sport behind closed doors. That's why they don't just challenge what he says, they try to discredit why he's saying it. Look closer. Headlines rarely focus on Sanders' player development, his enrollment spikes, or the professional-level structure he's brought to college football in record time. Instead, they lean on surface-level critiques. Too flashy, too loud, relies on social media buzz. Oh, but when another coach lands a player bundle from the transfer portal, that's called savvy? Somehow, when Deion does it, it's showboating. Why? Because Deion Sanders represents something outside the system's default settings. A coach who doesn't apologize for being black, being bold, or being excellent in his own way. And just like with his son, that energy isn't just tolerated, it's targeted. He is the inconvenient messenger they can't ignore and can't control, so instead of engaging with the message, they go after the man. They did it when he danced in the locker room. They did it when he called out media hypocrisy. And they're doing it now, as Shedeur's draft future suddenly becomes a silent conversation happening behind closed doors. But make no mistake, this isn't just a Deion problem. It's not even just a Shedeur problem. This is culture versus control. And once you understand that, you see exactly why this battle is just getting started. Deion Sanders isn't just building a college football team, he's building a movement, one that threatens the very DNA of how power works in college sports. And that's not an exaggeration, it's the uncomfortable truth. Because for decades, football programs have operated by an unspoken blueprint. The rules aren't written, but they've been enforced for generations. Follow the system, keep the emotions in check. Show flashes of swagger, but only the kind that sells jerseys, not the kind that makes statements. And most of all, never challenge the way the system works while you're inside it. That used to work. But then came Coach Prime. And suddenly, young athletes were watching someone at the top who didn't just win, he won his way. Loudly, clearly, without filter, without disguise. And whether people wanted to admit it or not, Deion's success cracked something far bigger than the top 25 rankings. It cracked the illusion of compliance being a requirement for greatness. And that's what this entire Shedeur controversy really represents. Shedeur is the living, throwing, leading embodiment of that crack widening. He isn't playing the game behind the scenes. He isn't toning anything down to fit post-game cliches. He's showing high-level execution on the field and complete self-possession off of it in interviews, on social, in every single camera angle, where most athletes shut everything down. And somewhere inside NFL war rooms and media boardrooms, that makes people nervous. Because if someone like Shedeur can go high in the draft, become a franchise quarterback, and still keep that same confidence and culture intact, that opens the door. And once that door opens, it's not just Shedeur walking through it. It's dozens of young athletes watching, adjusting, deciding they don't have to fit someone else's mold anymore. That's why this tension runs way deeper than anything Gabriel said. He was just a spark in a much bigger narrative. It's easy to say Shedeur is too flashy. It's easy to say Deion is overhyped. But what's harder to admit is that they've earned everything they've achieved, and a growing part of the system still wants to control how success looks when it comes from people like them. And whenever that control breaks, the response is never quiet. Just look at the media spin. One week, Deion's a revolutionary for rebranding a struggling program and leading college football in national impressions. The next week, he's a hypocrite for speaking on the very issues every coach knows are wrecking team chemistry across the country. How does that shift happen? Easy the moment he starts impacting revenue, recruiting control, or even the perception of what a college football head coach should act like, the gloves come off. Call it coded language, call it culture wars. Call it what it is, a pushback against a changing reality. Because, like it or not, Deion Sanders has found a new blueprint. And it's working. Recruits see it. Parents see it. Sponsors definitely see it. Let's talk numbers. Under Deion, Colorado became more watched than programs ranked far higher. Enrollment spiked. Brand deals followed. Players transferred into the program at rates not seen in decades, not just because it was fun, but because they saw purpose in it. He wasn't building clout, he was building structure. He wasn't selling dreams, he was showing players how to monetize their identity instead of letting media outlets define it for them. He turned football games into life lessons, press conferences into master classes, and swagger into substance. And even if Colorado wins 5 games next year, it won't matter. Because the mission is already in motion. And that is what traditionalists want to slow down. They say it's about NIL imbalance. They say it's about distractions. They say it's about instability. But what they really fear is irrelevance. A world where poorly tailored suits and corporate talk can't outshine someone in sunglasses and Jordans who knows what he's doing. They fear a model they can't replicate without becoming what they've always resisted: authentically connected, culturally aware leaders. You can't fake what Deion brings. You can't replicate what Shedeur represents, because for them, this is bigger than football. It's father and son proving that you can win without selling out your identity, that you can lead without absorption into an outdated system, that everything about your culture, your speech, your style, your community isn't something to silence, it's something to showcase. And if the NFL thinks this is just another trend, they better recognize what's really being built. Because this doesn't stop with Deion. This doesn't end with Shedeur. This blueprint is lighting up locker rooms from high schools to HBCUs to Power 5 programs that never used to feel seen. Now, they don't just feel seen, they feel powerful. And if the league wants to evolve alongside its future stars, not get left behind, it has to stop trying to suppress the players shifting the culture and start listening to them. Because here's the truth: you can't cancel authenticity. You can't downrank character. You can't outmaneuver someone who's been underdogged, overlooked, and underestimated because they've played this game before. And now, the game is playing catch-up. The critics? Their time is running out. The doubters? They'll be quoting Deion in 5 years. And the front offices suppressing draft grades out of fear? They'll be dialing Shedeur up on Sundays once their QBs throw one too many pick sixes. Let this be the wake-up call. Let this be the last time we watch a player get downgraded, not for what he's done, but for how boldly he did it. Success doesn't need to sound corporate. It doesn't need to come dressed in quiet, and it sure as hell doesn't need permission. Deion Sanders knows it. Shedeur Sanders lives it. And now, everyone else is going to have to deal with it. So let's put it all together. Deion Gabriel took an unnecessary shot thinking it was just sports talk. But Stephen A. Smith? He made it clear this wasn't just a bad take, it was a red flag, a tone-deaf moment that exposed how quickly confidence from the wrong person, the right person, becomes a problem in a system built to mute boldness, not reward it. And behind all the headlines, the mock drafts, the media spin, and the silence, there are real forces at play. Shedeur Sanders is being scrutinized not because of his flaws, but because of his fire. Not because he's underperforming, but because he's performing too well without sacrificing who he is. The establishment doesn't fear athleticism. They fear self-possession. They fear culture that doesn't need translation. They fear players and coaches who don't ask for access. They walk straight through the front door and take their seat. And Deion Sanders? He didn't just crack the door. He kicked it wide open for himself, for his son, and for a generation of athletes who are going to stop asking, "Do I fit the mold?" and start asking, "Why did the mold exist in the first place?" So if you're watching this thinking it's just a debate between two quarterbacks, think again. This is about who controls the future of the game. This is about gatekeepers realizing the gates don't matter anymore, and whether the league is ready or not, primetime is now permanent. Shedeur Sanders didn't need a legacy. He built his own. He didn't ask for validation. He earned respect. And the scary part isn't that he's great. It's that he's just getting started. Now it's your turn. Do you think Shedeur's draft drop is calculated or coincidence? Was Stephen A. right to shut Deion Gabriel down? Drop your opinion in the comments. We read every one. If you believe in rewriting the system, if you believe the old playbook is outdated, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and share this with someone who still thinks culture doesn't belong in football. Because talent is showing up, swagger is showing up, and more than ever, truth is showing up. And the last thing this system will be able to do is ignore it.